Thanks for joining me here on 13 Plus. My name is Eric Howard, and I'm the special projects producer here at 13 on Your Side. Now, here at 13 on Your Side, we have the ability through cameras much like this to view the entire skylines of some of the biggest cities here in West Michigan. From Grand Rapids to Muskegon, it's incredible how we can recognize these landmark locations through even just a silhouette as the sun rises or falls over our region. But those skylines have been shaped through decades of architectural vision and direction, and one of those architects' stories hit the silver screen of last year. 2024's multi-Oscar winning film, The Brutalist, released to critical acclaim across the world, starring Adrian Brody as the titular Laszlo Toth, a Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivor and architect who immigrates to the U.S. to begin a new life here in America. What you may not know, however, is that Toth is closely based on a real architect, Marcel Breuer, who found himself right here in West Michigan, ushering in a new era of architectural vision. We teamed up with Viz Bean Architects right here in Grand Rapids to look deeper into the history of one of the most controversial forms of architecture and the influence that it left on West Michigan as a whole. This is the history of brutalism in West Michigan.
Brutalist architecture, it comes out of Europe in the post-war, kind of post-World War II era. It's kind of an outcropping of the modernist movement, which, has its ideas in kind of simplifying and streamlining architecture from what it was before and embracing new materials like concrete, and then they use that to reshape the urban environment. My name is Michael Gibbs. I'm an architect here at Viz Bean Architects, a local firm to Grand Rapids. And I also taught at the Catholic University of America for a couple of years as an adjunct, so teaching traditional architecture and things. And I was also an adjunct TA for architectural history. Architecture, especially in the 20th century, kind of moved rapidly. And some of it had to do with, like I said, a lot of new materials with steel and concrete, and architects playing with them because it's a new thing. You don't exactly know what you can and can't do. This kind of ties in with the Brutalist movie. So the main character in that movie is Laszlo Toth, a fictional character. But when you kind of look at his history and you kind of look at the history of brutalism, you can find a lot of parallels with an architect named Marcel Breuer, who was a Hungarian German. He was Jewish. He gave up his Jewish faith due to the social pressures in Germany prior to the war. Ultimately left Germany, came to the United States. The connection to Grand Rapids with Marcel Breuer is over in Norton Shores, which is the St. Francis de Sales Church. A beautiful, beautiful example of brutalism. Has everything that you expect for brutalism. Big sweeping concrete walls, high vaulted ceilings with these exposed concrete beams, all of the texture of the building and everything. But then downtown, you have a number of buildings with Grand Rapids Community College, went kind of that brutalist movement. And then we have the Olive Calder Plaza area, that was Vandenberg Center at one point. A number of those buildings around there are brutalist. So you'll see the heavy concrete, a lot of the striping and the hammering. So what that is where they actually literally hammer the building with a thing that looks like a big meat tenderizer, right? And it exposes the aggregate of the concrete. And the whole notion of that is that they want you to understand what the materials were and how they're used, how they're formed, how they're shaped. And that's that honesty that they were going for with that architecture. The Graham pulls influences from brutalism. Its massing and its shape and everything seems very brutalist. A lot of like good pure brutalism from the early days of brutalism is very geometric, very and the Graham building is pulling a lot of that. Any architecture can really pull in sustainable practices. Its sustainability is about being smart with electricity and with water and various other elements and how you daylighting and things like that. It gets interesting because sometimes it is hard to tell what's brutalist and what's not. There are some just famous buildings, heavy amounts of concrete and everything, but then there's some other ones that you start getting a lot more glass and it starts kind of pushing that boundary and you're like, oh, is that or isn't that, right? And some of them even get real streamlined. Brutalist buildings will actually use multiple different approaches. Build your formwork You put the rebar in, you pour the concrete in as liquid, you let it cure, you pull the formwork away, and then you move up to the next level and you do it all again, and you keep doing that till you're done. Some buildings employ kind of both that and precast. So precast is it's formed often like a factory or somewhere else, and then it's shipped to the site and then placed, and then adjacent pieces, kind of like big giant Lego blocks. When people think of brutalist architecture, the key concrete elements that they're looking at, you're going to see the holes for the formwork, so kind of the round holes, that are every 4 feet or 8 feet or whatever was used in the formwork. You'll see those, and then you'll also see oftentimes the texture of the form itself. You get up close to it. Brutalism is kind of polarizing because, like I said, it's using concrete as its primary building material. And the way that gets perceived is kind of interesting because they're doing very interesting forms, and concrete's able to do a lot of things that other materials before that were never able to do. It's much faster to pour concrete than stack bricks and, kind of do all of those things. And concrete was a lot cheaper, and it's widely available, right? Because it's mostly a mixture of, cement and aggregate. It was cheap, it was quick, and you could do almost anything with it, any shape with it. They're able to start doing interesting things and kind of push the language of architecture, push the capabilities of building. And they're doing it through kind of this notion of kind of utopia and pushing kind of some new social ideas. The post-war era, as the rise of automobile came up, people were moving out to the suburbs. There were all sorts of, advancements, in terms of money availabilities and building and stuff to be able to do a lot of that. So people were kind of vacating cities. And so cities had this kind of identity crisis going, what do we do? What do we do? And so they started looking at urban renewal. And so there was a lot of government funding and things that allowed for this to happen. Another modernist / brutalist, Le Corbusier, was a famous architect who wrote a number of treatises from France, and he proposed this radiant city idea, which pushed for more vertical buildings with open space around them. And so you see that idea being infused into the cities. Again, it's one of those polarizing things where best intentions, but maybe the execution isn't, what was fully intended. And so you have this rise of all of these buildings creating these open spaces in cities across the country. And Calder Plaza is a great example of this, where they kind of, in a way, got a city. In some ways, it's a good thing because you need to revitalize a city, but in other ways, you do lose some of the historic fabric. And so there's some buildings that, went missing from Grand Rapids that people kind of were upset. Out of brutalism, you kind of see this move towards high-tech architecture and deconstructivism. If brutalism is showing you the concrete and just kind of how the building is built, high-tech takes it one step further and says, yeah, we're going to show you the structure, but we're also going to show you the other things too. So they start moving things like the ductwork and the electrical to the outside. It was intended as kind of to be a pure architecture, kind of pushing towards utopia. So is this, the base underlying thing is that, the architects doing this, as polarizing as their architecture is now, they had the best of intentions for humanity as a whole. And they were just trying to look, how do we kind of push things further and just kind of provide for a better world? And that's admirable. We're kind of in a period where I don't know if you can define a specific style. I think a lot of things are happening all at the same time. There's a revitalization in traditional neighborhoods and traditional architecture. That's kind of moving in the new urbanist movement. Then we have the rise of green and sustainable architecture, which I would argue is astylistic, but there is some style being generated in that. You have some returns to modernism and brutalism showing up, and then you have some people who are doing some other interesting things. And I think the main thing that, a brutalist would tell you is if it's being honest with its materials and presenting itself that way, then it's a brutalist building. Brutalism was maybe misunderstood, and maybe if, people give it a second chance, kind of just look at it again and see it for what it's worth, it's kind of a cool little period of architecture.